Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today, on our last show of this year, we are welcoming back Lama Kathy Wesley. And for those of you who have not listened to her or heard her on our show before, which I highly recommend, she is a student of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche since 1977, and she actually participated in the first 3-year retreat led by Khenpo Rinpoche at Karmaling Retreat Center in upstate New York, and thus earned the title of Retreat Lama. She is currently the resident teacher of the Columbus KTC, and I think she's a perfect guest to have on to talk about the topic of teacher-students, since she's been on both sides of it, and not everybody is in the Buddhist community, so she can see both sides, and I think she's going to bring a lot of experience and knowledge to the show, so I'm really excited about it, and I think it's a really important topic. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. And yes, this is our last show of the year. We'll be taking a little bit of a break in December and then coming back in January. And we're going to have a whole bunch of new shows starting on the 4th. And one of the things we're going to do in January, we're going to have a roundtable of our astrology and psychic friends and numerologists. And we're going to look at 2022 and try and make some prediction. And so that'll be a lot of fun. So you guys want to check in and tune into that. Get the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com. As we get things scheduled, we'll post things up there. And while you're there, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. We've set a goal of getting enough together to buy a couple of new cameras to replace some of our older ones, which are working but not as good as the newer ones. So we're hoping we can upgrade our quality a little bit. So if you can afford to buy us a coffee or two, please, we would really appreciate it. And subscribe to our newsletter. But the best thing you can do for the show is click and like and subscribe on YouTube. And that really makes a lot to us and means a lot and really helps the show. So that's one of the small things you guys can all do that really benefits us. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I hope you guys all have a good holidays. And I'm going to kick it back to you, Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. And welcome, Kathy.
Hey, thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, I'm always thrilled when you come back. And I think you are a nice mix of grounded experience and humor and great stories. I love a lot of your stories. So thank you for coming back.
No, it's I think that spiritual life is so important to everyone. And I think that anything we can do to keep each other encouraged, especially during difficult times, it's a great service. So thank you for the service that you and Michael are doing for everyone by keeping us going during this time.
Keeps us going. That's for sure. Doing this show has really helped. So, this topic I think is important to me for sure, and I know it is for you. So I'm going to let you go ahead and decide where you'd like to start with it.
I think that if we go back in history, let's just talk about history for a minute. Everybody who gets into some form of spiritual life needs guidance at some point in their life, whether they get that guidance from such what I would call relative reality formats, such as I Ching or tarot or astrology or whatever. There's always a place that we need guidance, where we just aren't quite sure what our next step should be, either in life but especially in spiritual training in life. And so I think that it's a natural feeling for us to want to have someone to guide us, especially if we're feeling a little bit unsure of ourselves and a little bit unsure of our path. It really is helpful to have someone who has been on the path before us, who can warn us about dangers on the path, can warn us about the pitfalls, but can also give us some insight into ourselves that sometimes we're not ready to know yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that throughout human history, teachers have been really important. And if we look at the life of the Buddha, the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, if we look at his life, even in his life, he had a number of human teachers. He had a number of teachers who gave him yoga instructions, who gave him meditation instruction, and he followed those instructions as far as they could take him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to accomplish his enlightenment or Buddhahood or his awakening he awakened from the sleep of ignorance about the nature of reality. And he was able to do this because of something that his music teacher had told him. So you can imagine that when he was still Prince Siddhartha and seeking on the path, he got all of this great advice from the great spiritual minds of his day, but he was unable to achieve the depth of meditation that he needed to after 6 long years. So what he did was he relaxed his mind a little. And in that moment of relaxation, he remembered a music lesson that he had had from a music teacher who said, if you're learning to play the lute, if it is too tight, if the string is too tight, it won't sound. And if the string is too loose, it'll have a bad sound. So you have to tune it perfectly in the middle. And then when that string is tuned perfectly to the middle, then you will get a beautiful sound. And so he realized that he had been pushing too hard on his mind to ambitiously try to reach some kind of depth in his meditation. And so he took many steps to relax his environment, relax his mind, relax his being, and then he attained awakening. So even the great minds needed teachers.
I love the story about the music teacher. I did not know that. In fact, in my own life, I had 2 music teachers that were spiritual teachers for me as well because of the advice they gave me. So that's an interesting correlation. And also that you never know when a teaching is going to ripen in a person's mind, it sounds like. Like at that point, that's when he remembered his music teacher.
Yeah. And I think that all of us have sort of all of us who have an interest in spiritual life, in the inner life, all of us who have that kind of interest, we have some intuitive understanding of what we need to do and some intuitive understanding of what we need to be and where we need to go and how we should study. But even the intuitive sense will only take us so far because there's unknown territory as we try to discover ourselves, whether it's our path, where we try to discover our path, whether we, as the Buddha did, are trying to understand the essence and the nature of mind and consciousness itself. There's some uncharted territory that we have, even though we've maybe lived many reincarnations, lifetimes, right? Even though, according to the Buddha, we've lived many lifetimes, we still haven't achieved this spiritual enlightenment yet. So as long as we have not yet achieved that, we're going to need to have that kind of guidance. So intuition will take us to a certain depth and breadth, but then we have to begin to seek that guidance.
Now, from my own experience working in the metaphysical world over the many years, I have heard a lot of what I consider misunderstanding about the guru and what the guru really is and how the guru operates. And maybe I'm fortunate because I did meet Khenpo Rinpoche. He was really my first introduction, so I was lucky that when I was only 23. And then some of the other teachers, so that my first impression was quite different from what a lot of people think of, that the guru is going to take over your life and that you have to be subservient. And I remember thinking like, well, that never happened to me. Said, if anything, I had interviews with Khenpo Rinpoche where he would actually, one of the things I found about Khenpo Rinpoche, because he was a wise teacher, is he worked with my personality really well, and I didn't have a lot of confidence. So he would help me make decisions on my own about even some of the practices. Like he recognized what would be healing for me, I thought, because of it was very healing to have someone like that be so gentle and kind. And so I think that you were talking about how earlier teachers are there also to help recognize things in you. And it's not necessarily, in my experience, something bad in you. In fact, in the opposite, in my mind, was he saw the merit that I might see in myself, I didn't see in myself, and he would try to encourage it out.
Mm-hmm. This is so true. And I think your experience is a testament to Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's talent and his giftedness as a teacher, in that for many spiritual teachers, they are quite directive, which is what we hear about. We hear about the examples like the ancient Indian guru, Buddhist guru Tilopa, who had a student who was a college professor named Naropa. And Naropa had a lot of book learning, but he didn't have a lot of faith and devotion. So Tilopa created circumstances and created things artificially that would teach Naropa something important. And it was always about reducing his pride and reducing his arrogance, because he had been such a big Buddhist college professor that when he started studying with Tilopa, who was a very simple yogi, that it was really tough for him to actually accept the teachings from Tilopa. So Tilopa said, well, if I had a student, he would go over there at that wedding party and he would steal the soup from that wedding party and bring it back to me. And so Naropa then said, okay, I guess I have to do exactly what he says or I won't get the blessing. So he went and he stole the soup. And then he was beaten up, and then he was in a pile. And then he said to Tilopa, who happened to be coming along, oh, I'm in pain. I'm a corpse. And Tilopa said, oh, nonsense. And he touched him and healed him and then brought him back to wholeness, and then took him to his next adventure. And in all, he accomplished 12 different hardships that worked on different aspects of Naropa's selfishness and various aspects of his pride. But these days, in modern times, these kinds of teachers, they don't operate. They don't operate like this. They are more collaborative. Like Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was very collaborative. He knew a little bit about our affect. He could look at us and know instantly kind of what kind of person we were and what we would benefit from. And so he would guide us in a much more collaborative way, but he would still deliver some of those hard lessons in a way that was palatable for us. Mm-hmm. He would say something like, well, one time after I'd been his student for quite a long time, and I was starting to teach myself after the 3-year retreat. And he said, he gave me advice, how to listen and how to respond to people. And then he said, and don't think you have to protect the Buddha. And I'm like, what? And it's like, he said, I've seen you. He said, you get impatient when people say things that are critical of the Dharma. You need to stop that. And I'm like, so, and that was a weeper for me, because he really saw that I had this sort of prideful feeling about being a Buddhist. And I would be critical mentally and verbally toward people who said things that were contrary to Dharma. He said, your job is not to fix that. Your job is to be with that and be present with that and be patient with that. Then he said, you can overcome everyone and everything with the proper practice of patience. So I learned like 2 lessons that day. I saw a piece of myself that I wasn't quite ready to look at, but I also heard about the value of patience. So
that's a great story.
Right there.
Yeah, that's a great story. Now, there are people don't realize that there are teachings on picking the right teacher, but also the whole relationship between the teacher and student. So I didn't really know until afterwards. Actually, later I remember finding out, saying, "Oh, there's like a whole book on this," and probably more. So let's
Yeah.
maybe go into some of that.
Sure. I first things first, I'll share a verse that from this book, which is I'm sorry it's out of print, but I will provide you with a link to read a copy. It's called The 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. And this particular commentary is by Khenpo Tsultrim Gyaltsen, who himself, until he retired a few years ago, was just an amazing teacher who taught in all kinds of styles. But verse number 6 of the 37 really sort of summarizes what the teacher and student relationship is like. It actually starts on verse 5 because it's about how to get yourself distant from bad friends. So verse number 5 is, when friendship with someone causes your 3 poisons to increase, and that's attachment, aversion, and bewilderment. When friendship with someone causes your 3 poisons to increase and degrades the activities of listening, reflecting, and meditating on the Dharma, and destroys your loving kindness and compassion, to give up such a friendship is the practice of a bodhisattva. And so this is not telling us we have to be perfect today, but it's telling us what to look out for and how to choose your bad friends. And I mean, how to identify bad friends. And then in verse 6, he says, well, how do you identify a good friend? When in reliance on someone, your defects wane and your positive qualities grow like the waxing moon. To cherish such a spiritual friend more than your own body is the practice of a bodhisattva. Well, we're not going to be treasuring people more than our own body just now, but by giving us this example of a person who, by reliance on their advice, our own defects begin to wane and our positive qualities begin to wax like the waxing moon. To me, that's the summary of the value of spiritual teachers, is that there's someone who help us to distance ourselves from our negative habits and to increase our positive habits. But
I totally agree with that. I was pretty young when I would go in for my interviews with Khenpo Rinpoche, and for whatever reason, I was just completely honest with him, whatever was going on, and I didn't have any filters, which I know is a good thing, but it wasn't anything I thought ahead of doing. And I remember he gave me some really, really good advice just as a person to help me in my life. And once in a while, there were some stern things, like around love especially. He once said to me that I was too impulsive and I needed to be more practical. And then he told me that love took many, many years, and it really stuck with me. And honestly, I think I was ready to hear that because it didn't upset me that much. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't think about being practical in love, but when even when I had left Tibetan Buddhism and to study some other things, I always felt a connection to Khenpo Rinpoche. And so I did want to talk a little bit about, in at least Tibetan Buddhism, there is this concept of the root Lama, the main teacher that you have learned, maybe most of what you've learned from in this one life. And then there'll be other teachers, but that you feel this special connection to, because I would say that even though I'm a terrible practitioner, I'm lazy, and I, argue with certain things in my mind philosophically, I have always felt this connection to Khenpo Rinpoche throughout my life. And so I know that that's to him, he's my root teacher. So I'd like you to sort of explain what that is, because I think that's another thing people get sort of outside, think again that there's misunderstandings about that, I think.
I agree. And I think that this is part of the reason why podcasts like this are so important. And that is because we get the opportunity to share what we have learned in our own life, and also to find out what other people are thinking about. But I received a number of teachings about teachers from my teachers. And so I have maybe 3 teachings that I've received that just really stuck with me about the whole teacher and student relationship. And one of them has to do with this matter of who are your branch teachers and who are your root teachers. And one of my lamas said, if you don't have a teacher right now, don't be desperate. Don't be desperate. Don't say, oh, I must find one. Don't be desperate. Just do your practice. Just do your spiritual practice. If it's meditation, meditate, and so on, just do your spiritual practice. And that spiritual practice will create inside of you an atmosphere of virtue. And that atmosphere of virtue that you create inside yourself by doing your spiritual practice, this is what he said, will come to fruition as meeting different teachers. So your good karma from doing your practice will ripen as the presence of different teachers in your life. And from among those teachers, you will find some whose advice really helps you. And those will become your branch teachers, like the branches of a tree. And then from among those branch teachers, you will develop relationships with someone whose their advices help you the very most. And those will be your root teachers. And my teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, told me that the teacher who makes the biggest difference in your mind is your main root teacher. That is the person who will always be that sort of that anchor for you, that root essentially of your virtue and of your spiritual practice. So I like the sort of organic description of meditate first. That comes to fruition as meeting teachers, and from among those teachers you meet some of their advice will help you. Those are your branch teachers, and then from among that, your root teachers will emerge. And what's cool about this is that it's very organic. It's not like forced, because there's a saying that everybody likes to quote, which is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I heard that too when I was a yoga student. And but it's like I may or may not have been ready when Khenpo Rinpoche appeared in my life, also as a young person. But I knew instantly, because of his overwhelming power as an individual. He was very charismatic, but he was also very wise and very compassionate. So usually he was also strong, really strong. He had a real strong vibe to him, if you want to call that. And usually when somebody is strong, they're not gentle. Or when they're gentle, they're not strong.
Right.
So the idea was that he had this gentle strength about him, and that was how I always thought of him that way, because he allowed us to study in our own way and was collaborative with us and helped us to helped us to anchor ourselves in pragmatism and so forth. But he also had this almost, you experienced it obviously from your story. He had this almost, I'm going to bring Star Wars up, sorry, this almost Jedi Knight ability to say, these are not the droids you're looking for. The idea where he could like tell you a hard truth and you would go, yeah, I can take that in. Yeah. And he did the same thing with me one time, also about relationships. And he made a definite statement to me, and I'm like, well, yeah, now that I'm not quibbling about it in my own mind, I see the wisdom of that. So he just had this ability to kind of get in with the truth and have it not hurt too much.
That is really actually true. I would say, because it was a pretty, I was in a very romantic period, so it was a pretty direct statement, but it was the way he did it. So I mean, that is true of teachers in general, that a very good teacher knows how to size up a student. I mean, this is one reason why I believe in the archetype of the teacher everywhere. Maybe because I've had some bad teachers, but I've mostly had some amazing teachers that have profoundly touched my life. And I think sometimes I worry, like, especially in the New Age movement, they say, oh, once we're in the Aquarian age, which some people think we are, you won't need a teacher. It's all. And I thought, what? Are you crazy? And I said, well, perhaps the relationship with the teacher will change and grow in some new ways, like the collaborative one really would be an Aquarian kind of thing. So that is one reason why this topic, means a lot to me, because I feel I hear that kind of thought that will be spiritually awake on our own. And I think that's very arrogant.
I think what it is, I think where this comes from is the very human distrust of authority. And there's plenty of reasons why human beings distrust authorities. And because no one wants to give over their guidance to another person and then be fooled by or taken advantage of by another person. So I think very wisely, people have to size each other up. In Tibetan texts, one of the texts that I was referring to earlier in the pre-show when we were chatting was The Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Gampopa. This book was written in the 12th century. And it basically said that the student has to spend some time evaluating the teacher on 3 specific qualities. Does the teacher have learning? Does the teacher have spiritual qualities? And is the teacher compassionate? Learning, qualities, and compassion. And so if the teacher possesses these things, then you can take them as a teacher, but you have to evaluate them first, and you can't just jump into it. And my own teacher said to me, if somebody comes up to you and says, I knew you in a past life and I was your teacher, he said, be a little bit suspicious about that. And he said, because he said, that's not necessarily what's going to happen. And especially, he said, especially if a teacher comes up to you and tells you that they're enlightened, he said, have some concern about that, because the best teachers don't say that.
Yeah, and that's true. And we do, I think it is important to look at some of the misuses even in Buddhism that have come out through the years. And I'm certainly aware of them. There was actually a really good article recently in Tricycle. It was the summer of 2020 called Becoming Whole. And it was an interview with Werner Vogt. I don't know if that's Vogd, how you pronounce his name, but he had been doing these interviews with students of Sogyo Rinpoche, and it turned out there was a lot of sexual, physical, emotional abuse they were all reporting. And he's not the first one to have this in the Buddhist community. And certainly when you think about the 3 qualities that you just talked about, then perhaps as students, we have to be aware of sort of looking, is this really spiritual behavior? Is this really compassionate? Perhaps because some of these teachers are very learned. I mean, incredibly learned. I can't even fathom what they have to memorize and learn to be in the positions they are, that perhaps that does somehow people overlook things, I think, with very, very learned people in general. So certainly we as students have responsibilities too, to notice and talk amongst each other. Even, did that happen to you? Which I think would be important. If it was like happening to everyone, then you think, okay, there's something really wrong here.
Mm-hmm. The 2 stories that come to mind, or the 2 teachers that come to mind, who have given a really intelligent conversation about this. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a number of years ago, was addressing the question of teachers who end up doing abusive things. And he said that when you go into a relationship with a teacher, he said, you go in with your eyes open. You don't check your common sense at the door. And I think that might have been a paraphrase, but he said, you keep your common sense, you keep your wits about you, and then watch the behavior and see whether that behavior accords with the Dharma or not. And I think that is, and he said, if you see something, say something. This was what the Dalai Lama said a number of years ago about this. And the other teacher who gave advice on this topic was the very venerable Trungpa Rinpoche. That's spelled Thrangu. And you can look him up online. He has a wonderful website, Rinpoche.com, and it's full of great teachings. And I actually think there's a teaching in there on the teacher-student relationship. But what he said was, all teachers are a mixture of qualities and faults. All teachers are a mixture of qualities and faults. He said, our job as a student is to choose a teacher who has relatively more qualities than faults, and to practice the teacher's qualities and not to practice the teacher's faults. And I think that really made a lot of sense to me. Choose a teacher with relatively more qualities than faults and practice those qualities and not practice the faults. And so he came at the subject from the standpoint that every one of us is a mixture of qualities and faults. And as such, we have to use our discriminating wisdom and our discriminating awareness and so forth to really make that judgment for ourselves. It's like the Dalai Lama said, don't check your common sense at the door, and then see whether people's actions and words match. And that's even discussed, I believe that's discussed in detail in the other book I'm recommending, which is The Teacher and Student Relationship by Jamgon Khantrul. This idea of the list of the qualities that teachers need to have, as opposed to the faults that you should watch out for. This is described in this book, as well as in this 12th century tome, The Jewel Ornament. So both of these books describe the kinds of qualities you're looking for: this compassion, learning, and qualities. And tell you to look out for people whose actions and words do not match. That's the main warning that they warn us about, are teachers who say one thing but do another. And we're all like that. We're all contradictory like that in our lives. We all have said one thing and done another. And so we have to be honest with ourselves about who we've been and what we've done as students and teachers, and to find ways to continuously make ourselves better. So
I love that. And I didn't know that about the Dalai Lama. It's nice to know that teachers that have such a big audience talk about that publicly too, because I think that's hugely important, just getting it out into the world. And I definitely feel like people are more aware now of it because of probably because of the internet and social media. Things spread a lot quicker in terms of information. What's interesting I don't know if it's in all Buddhist traditions too, is also this concept of the Samaya vow, and how a student's practice can positively or negatively affect a teacher. Because I remember something Khenpo Rinpoche said when he recovered from cancer. I read this later. I didn't even know he'd had cancer. I kind of lost touch. And then he was thanking his students for their Samaya vow that had helped him to overcome his illness. And it really, it touched me, but I knew he really meant it. Like I knew it wasn't just so talk about the idea of how we as students, we're not enlightened yet, but that we actually can benefit the teachers as we practice.
I think I don't fully understand the topic of Samaya, so I can just basically say I'm not necessarily the best person to talk about this, but let me tell you what my experience has been. my experience goes all the way back to when I first became a student of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. And he said that because the relationship between the teacher and the student is so close, the relationship is so close, that what the student does has an impact on the teacher, and what the teacher does has an impact on the student. And so, and in fact, I'm going to go back a little farther to a teaching that the previous Kalu Rinpoche gave, where he said that the teacher's compassion is like a hook, and the student's devotion is like a ring, or the student faith and devotion is like a ring. And when the two meet, he said, the teacher takes us from happiness to happiness and then to enlightenment. That's the way he put it. And he said that that this is why it's good to, once you've examined a teacher and determined that the teacher is appropriate, that you then try to practice the teacher's advice for you. And that as you do that, that forms your faith and devotion. There are 3 kinds of devotion. See if I can remember them off the top of my head. They're in jewel ornament. But anyway, the first is like admiring faith, where you admire someone and you say, wow, I'd love to be like that. That's admiring faith. But it doesn't have a lot underneath it. It's just, wow, you know. And then the second one is this aspiring faith. Like I actually want what they have. It's not just I admire them, but wow, I'd love to have I really want to work on having what they have. And then the third one is, I can't remember the name of the third one, but the third one is this, it's the faith of certainty, which means that we have actually worked the instructions given to us. And then we are really anchored in that. And when we have that kind of faith toward a teacher, when we practice, this is what Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche told me. He said, when we practice, the teacher benefits automatically from our practice. So when a teacher teaches us and we begin to improve as individuals, that actually carries through and it benefits the teacher as well, because it was their teachings that brought about the change in us. Mm-hmm. And our effort then benefits the teacher's longevity, health, and so on. And so he basically, that's why Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, after his cancer scare a number of years ago, was able to recover from that. He also had a health scare in the 1990s, somewhere in the early 1990s, when he had a very bad bout of bronchitis. And he recovered from it. They were quite worried about him because he had some lung issues from having had tuberculosis as a young person. And so he said everybody who prayed for him actually helped his longevity. And he thanked us for that. So I'm feeling that when the teacher is a kind of an amazing person themselves, that they then benefit the students automatically, and then the students benefit the teacher automatically because of the closeness of this relationship. This relationship is very close. The 2 closest karmic relationships, it is said in the teachings, are your parents and children and your teacher, because the teacher's words and actions are so impactful toward our path to awakening. That's why our relationship with them is so impactful. Whereas the other karmic relationships with our children and our parents are impactful because of the closeness of our relationship to them in this life. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the genesis of the Buddhist culture's emphasis on taking good care of the relationship with your parents and your children. Doesn't mean that you allow bad behavior, but it does mean that you care for them and do your best.
Wow. So when a teacher that is important in one's life dies, what happens in your mind, since you have gone through this recently, what happens in your mind with that relationship?
A lot of this depends upon what we think enlightenment is. If we think that enlightenment is just a deep state of meditation, then we may just think of it as being something passive. But if we think of enlightenment as being dynamic and aimed toward the benefit of others, so if we think that enlightenment is a passive something, well, then there's really not much that a person who has passed away can do for us, or that they can do for us while they are alive. But if we think of enlightenment as being a dynamic state that has the welfare of all sentient beings in mind, that's what we call the bodhisattva commitment in Buddhism, the commitment of the person who dedicates themselves to benefiting everybody they meet, potentially. And that if we think that it's a dynamic state, then that means that while they're living and after they've passed, there's no difference. There's no difference in their capacity to assist us. We may not be able to hear their advice in person to person, but we can think on and reflect on all of the teachings they gave us. Because there's a discussion in Tibetan Buddhism about the outer teacher and the inner teacher and the most inner teacher. They usually say outer, inner, and secret, but I think the word secret, in English, it brings up a lot of weird things.
That's true.
So I like to say outer, inner, and most inner. The outer teacher is the human being who gives us instruction. The inner teacher is our capacity to internalize their lessons. Because there are moments in my life when I remember things that Rinpoche said to me. And so that's kind of like the inner teacher, right?
Right.
But the most inner teacher is our own inherent inner wisdom that we have not yet uncovered and tapped into. In Buddhism, we call that inner wisdom Buddha nature. In other words, we all have the capacity, I say capacity, that's the wrong word, potential. We all have the potential to become a Buddha because we have a mind that can know itself and can know itself completely. So we all have the potential for Buddhahood, but the capacity will differ according to our karma and our habits and so on. But that most inner teacher is our capacity for awakening or a potential for awakening, and our inner wisdom that may not yet have been uncovered and activated, but someday might be. And that is our most inner teacher.
Hey,
someday we'll be able to rely on that one.
We have a question on our chat. We have a question from Dina.
Okay.
Can you tell us about how aspiration Buddhist practice cause fruition of karma, which causes contact with the teachers who give us advice?
Not sure I understand the question. Try it again.
Okay, can you tell us about how aspiration Buddhist practice, so I guess aspiring, causes the
aspiring faith. Yeah.
Causes the fruition of karma, which I think you started in the beginning, you talked about, which causes then contact with the teachers who give us advice.
Okay, thank you very much. I do understand that. This is my best attempt at putting this all in context. The teacher who said, if you haven't met a teacher yet, you find teachers by just doing your spiritual practice. What spiritual practice does is it creates an atmosphere inside of us of virtue. It creates an inner atmosphere of virtue. In other words, we know how it feels to be angry and to be unhappy and to be jealous and competitive and all of those horrible things that human beings can do that are negative. We know how bad that feels, but we also know how good it feels to be generous and loving and kind. So you can kind of see the atmosphere you would rather create within yourself. And so meditation and prayer and doing kind actions create an inner atmosphere of virtue. And that inner atmosphere of virtue opens our minds. And it allows us to see and be relaxed and to see things maybe we didn't see before. And that will ripen, that virtue will ripen as coming into contact with beings who can help us. So that's where we can make aspirations. We can say, may I meet teachers who will benefit me, and may I meet teachers whose advice will help me. That's the aspiring part. But when we do our practice, these two things come together and actually will. So I'm going to use my own life as an example of this, because I was reading books by the great Hindu master, Baba Ram Das. And in one of his books, he said, the best teacher, he says, let me be honest. And this is in his book, Grist for the Mill. It's the chapter entitled Lineage, if you want to go find it. In that chapter, he said, okay, I confess, I created my own religion. I took a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and a little bit from here, and I created my own faith. He said, but I don't recommend that to any of you. I recommend to you, dear reader, that you go find a genuine lineage master from a lineage that traces its lineage back to an enlightened being, and then you study that to its completion. So I said, wow, what a great idea, but where am I going to find that? And then 2 weeks later, I saw a poster. And it had, I don't think it had Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's picture on it, but it had his name on it. And I'm like, okay, I'm okay. Thank you, universe. And then I went to see him. So this kind of thing, I feel, happened in my own life because I put it out there and said, I hope I meet someone and I really want to learn kindness and goodness. So I don't know if this helps Dina or not, but I really appreciate her asking about it. And I also want to thank all the people who are watching or listening to begin to think about their own lives and their own path, and how teachers can help them. So.
Yeah, and I love that story. In my own experience too, at the time I met Khenpo Rinpoche, I had been doing a different spiritual practices. I was really into Edgar Cayce, and I was doing these prayers, and I do remember having the aspiration of wanting to learn to meditate. And I forget, I must have learned that from Cayce. And then I there was a room for rent in Brooklyn, and the woman put that she was a meditator too. And so I thought, well, that's kind of a cool thing. And I mean, I didn't really consciously realize all the connections, right? I thought, oh, great, she meditates too. And turns out she was a student of Khenpo Rinpoche's. So I had a different spiritual path in a sense that led me to the next part of it, because I had, like you're like, oh, that's a great idea, the lineage. And so being then open perhaps to where the universe sort of takes you is also, it seems like, at least from my experience, part of the process.
Mm-hmm. No, I can understand that, because I think that having a mind that's open to ideas and having a mind that is open to the benefits of meditation is a great place to start. And then gradually, as we work toward our own spiritual path, then these other opportunities will come up for us. And then we can use our guidebooks to guide us to teachers that have relatively more qualities than faults. And this will help us to begin to uncover those qualities for ourselves, as was mentioned in the 37 practices. When in reliance on someone, your defects wane and your qualities increase like the waxing moon. So that brings us back on that. But I feel as though we all have the potential to uncover our basic goodness. and our teachers, even after our teachers pass away, those inner lessons that we have internalized, they stay with us. And in a way, they are our teachers speaking to us very clearly in our own minds. Their lessons are living on in us. Mm-hmm. And I feel in a way that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was unique in that he knew what teaching to give to each person, and he actually gave each person something really unique. And that now our work, now that he's passed away, because he passed away in 2019, and we miss him terribly, and we miss getting his advice on everything. But if we think about it, his inner lessons are still with us. And if we talk to the other students and we talk about our experience with him, then those stories will lead us to those little nuggets of teaching that will benefit us. And I do want to say one more thing about that, and that is that in the wake of the passing of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, some of his students, led by his nephew Lama Karma Drodol, put together a website called rememberingrinpoche.org. And people have started to tell their stories of Khenpo Rinpoche and talk about his impact on their life. And you can learn quite a bit about him through the stories of how he benefited others. So I wanted to let people know that awesome. They can check that out. We're on Facebook and on the interwebs at that address.
I'm sure there are lots of good stories too, because I mean, he touched a lot of people's lives. He worked. One of the things that I really always was impressed is how hard he worked, the long hours, and he was a good. He could sew. I remember that about him, which is, you don't really, some of the things that he did, you don't really. I remember seeing him sew and how he could often outwork people in his 60s. Which made me think, okay, maybe there must be something to meditation that he can stay so focused, that again, looking for the qualities and, over the years kind of seeing, I wish I could be more focused, or because I think sometimes too, people may think they have to become a Lama to want to aspire to be like Khenpo Rinpoche. Whereas if you just look at his qualities of kindness, discipline, awareness, wisdom, these are qualities that many people would aspire to. That's how I view it, because in my lifetime, I know I'm not going to be a Buddhist Lama, and that's not my path. But that doesn't mean I don't benefit from admiring the qualities he emanates.
This is true, and I think all of us have the potential to benefit others, which is the whole Bodhisattva path. We all have that potential. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, when he was giving talks, it was somewhere around 1997, because there was all KTC, because the centers he started were called Karma Tegsum Choling centers. And so they're called KTC for short. And he had a meeting of all of the coordinators of the KTCs from around the country. And he said, it is the responsibility of the older students. And he didn't mean old by age. He meant it's the responsibility of those. He said, if you know one more bit of Dharma than somebody else, you are senior to them in that area. And he said, it's your responsibility to create the atmosphere for new people to meet the Dharma. And so that by being open-minded, by being good listeners, he said that most people who come to a Dharma center, they are feeling something. Sometimes they feel conflict. Sometimes they feel sad. He said, listen to what is going on for them. And he said, don't think you have to fix their problem. He said, just listen, and then say whatever brief and a heartfelt bit of advice you can give. And he said, gradually, he said, if it's helpful to them, that they will consider you of a person who they can trust, and that person who really has their best interest in mind. So even though the word Lama, La means, it refers to Lana Madepa, which is a Tibetan phrase meaning unsurpassed, and Ma literally refers to mother. The idea of not all of us are going to be a Lama, but all of us will be able to be that friend whose advice helps us to uncover our qualities. So we can all help each other along the path. And earlier you were talking about people who say that in the age of Aquarius, we won't need teachers. And I think the problem comes when people have uncertainty about authority and maybe some very healthy distrust of authority, but by that distrust actually causes them, it doesn't just like protect them from the bad ones, it actually also protects them from the good ones. It prevents them from connecting with someone who actually could help them. And so we have to have some humility about ourselves and know and admit what we don't know, and then be ready to have somebody say, hey, it would be better if you were like nicer to people, and and so forth and so on. As Rinpoche once said, look, if you have a problem with one person, it could be that person. But if you have a problem with this person and this person and this person and this person, he said, you got to open your mind to the possibility it could be you. and so this kind of pragmatic advice, we would be denying ourselves this kind of incredibly pragmatic advice if we thought that we didn't need a teacher. I never forget Khenpo Rinpoche, a gentleman asked, you get some people in talks, in Dharma talks, that they know some stuff and they want to show what they know. And so this one young man said to Khenpo Rinpoche, well, teacher, he said, if what you're saying is true, this should mean that we should just let go of everything, including the Dharma. You should like throw the Dharma away, that because like you don't need the Dharma. You absolutely don't need the teaching, because that's holding on to the Dharma is holding on to something, and Buddhism is all about letting go. And Rinpoche just nodded and listened and nodded and listened. And he said, I think I understand your logic. He said, let me see if I can say something about that. He said, by your logic, he said, if I got into a boat and started rowing across a lake, and I got halfway across that lake, I would say to myself, I really don't need this boat. I think I'll just walk to the other side. And then you get out of the boat and you try to walk on top of the water, and then you sink like a stone. He said, this is your logic. And he said, so I think it might be better if you considered having the Dharma and holding on to the Dharma until you don't need it anymore. It's like a boat. It takes you to the other shore. You don't have to abandon it until you get there. And I thought to myself, wow, what an amazing answer.
Yeah, I love that.
I would say the same thing to folks who would say teachers are unnecessary.
I love that. Now we have a couple of minutes. I wanted to let you speak a little bit about the monastery and where it's at, just at the end of the show, and if you're getting close to opening and all of that.
Sure. Yeah, two things. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was sent to the United States in the 1970s. That's ancient history. By the previous Karmapa, the 16th Karmapa, to establish a Buddhist monastery in Woodstock, New York, of all places, called Karma Triana Dharma Chakra. It's right now, it is as complete as it can be. They've got a residence and they've got a temple. It's a beautiful location. And because of COVID, it's been closed, but you can tune in to many Dharma teachings that are now being given on Zoom. And so you can check out Karma Triana Dharma Chakra at Kagyu, KAGYU.org. And so in our center, the Karma Take-Some Choling Center of Columbus, Ohio, we are coming up on the 6th anniversary of an arson fire that destroyed our little old wooden church in January of 2016. And now 6 years later, we are getting ready to finish the building project. We were able to raise the $3 million that was needed to build a larger building, because that was Rinpoche's advice. He said, rebuild it on your land and make it bigger. And so we packed a lot into a little urban lot and it's a $3 million building, and it's getting finished, and we hope to reopen it, COVID willing, sometime in early 2022. But of course, we are still collecting donations, and this is Giving Tuesday. So hey,
on Facebook, right? You can do it on Facebook.
You can give on Facebook, and you can go to the Columbus KTC. It actually, Columbus KTC on Facebook, and give today if you're free, or and you can also give by going to Columbus KTC, all one word, columbusktc.org. They have a donation button just like everybody else, so you can give there also.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on the raising of the funds and the building. And thank you for coming on the show. We've run out of time now. Lama Kathy, we loved having you. And thank you all for listening all through the year. We really appreciate it. I will see you next year in 2022. So have a great December.